What do you think of when you think of Cuba? Maybe you think of this. Maybe it's rum. Maybe a movie from the 80s.
Say hello to my little friend!
When I think of Cuba, I think of sandwiches. Cubano sandwiches. Maybe the greatest sandwich in the whole world. In today's episode, we are making Cuban sandwiches, Cubanos, from scratch. The Cubano sandwich may be the greatest sandwich in the world. Sorry, BLT. We need pork. Specifically, we need a pork shoulder to make a mojo marinated, mojo roasted, something like that. But we need to go to the market. Let's head out. So we're about 30 seconds away from my house. This is the Santa Catarina market. I know we'll be able to find a pork shoulder in here. Let's jump inside. Quiero esta, por favor. Gracias. All right, that was easy. We got our pork shoulder. Let's jump back in our kitchen and start preparing it. So this is our pork shoulder. To start off with, we need to brine this. Basically what that's gonna do is it's gonna infuse some flavor in here, it's gonna put some water in here so that it stays juicier after we slow roast it. Let's set this aside for a second and let's start making our brine. I've got a bowl which should hold everything. Hopefully it does. We're gonna start off with some orange juice. Add some water. Some rum.
The rum!
Yes, the rum is gone.
Why is the rum gone?
A bit of rice vinegar. Some sugar. All the sugar. Some salt. Some cloves of garlic that I just crushed with the back of my knife. And finally, some fresh herbs. I have some thyme, some rosemary, some sage, and some bay leaf. I'm supposed to use fresh oregano, but I didn't have any, so I'm gonna use a bit of dried oregano. And some whole peppercorns. We'll give this a whisk to combine everything. And then we're gonna put our pork right into our brine. If I learned anything from John Leguizamo in Chef, you have to massage your pork and do some dancing. Now that we're done with the dancing portion of today's episode, we can cover this with plastic wrap and then we're gonna set it in the fridge to brine for 12 hours. I've forgotten something super important. Cuban sandwich needs Cuban bread. I guess I could use a baguette or something along those lines, but I don't think it's gonna be the same, so I guess I could make the bread. Yeah, you think I should make the bread, don't you? All right, let's make the bread. So I don't know how to make Cuban bread, but internet will tell me, so I'm gonna jump on and see if I can find a half-decent recipe and figure out how we can make Cuban bread. All right, I think I have found a good recipe courtesy of Chef John. Pretty straightforward, except we need a starter. We need to basically combine some yeast, water, and flour and let that sit overnight, basically the same amount of time as we're brining our pork. So that's gonna work out perfectly. So let's jump back in the kitchen and let's make the starter for our Cuban bread. I've got a jar. To it, I'm gonna add some warm water, some all-purpose flour, and half a teaspoon of yeast. I'm gonna mix this until it's all combined. And this too can get covered in plastic wrap. It needs to sit for at least 8 hours. We'll probably let it sit for a little bit longer so that it's done around the same time as our pork. Pork is brining, starter is starting, getting ready for us to make bread with it tomorrow. That is basically all I can do now. I'm gonna get some sleep, and then tomorrow we're going to put all this together to make our Cuban sandwiches. See you in a second.
The next day.
Welcome back. It is a new day. I guess it's only been a couple of seconds for you. So we can continue with our Cubano sandwiches. We've had our pork brining overnight, and we've got our starter, which should be just about ready at this point. We're gonna start with the bread because that's probably gonna take the most amount of time. So let's jump back in the kitchen and finish making our bread. So we've got our starter, which sat in the fridge overnight. You know, it's bubbling up a little bit, so we're not gonna add this for a few minutes, so we'll set this aside and get started on our dough. The first thing we need to do is make sure our yeast is still alive. Take some sugar, add our yeast, and add a bit of water. Just whisk this together gently. The sugar is going to activate the yeast, and we'll check to see that they're still alive because it will start to bubble slightly, and that'll tell us the yeast is alive, which we need to make our bread. Okay, we'll set this aside while we start putting together our dough. One of the keys to Cuban bread is lard. We're just gonna add to the bowl, a bit of salt. Then I'm gonna start with a cup of flour. I'm just using all-purpose flour. Start giving this a mix to combine the fat and the flour. Now I'm gonna add in my mixture that I just made with basically yeast and the sugar, just check that it was still alive. Add it to our dough. And start stirring this until a sort of rough dough starts to form. So this has come together into sort of a wet dough at this point. Now I'm gonna add my starter and some more flour, and we're gonna keep mixing this. Once everything's incorporated and we have a very, very sticky dough, we are gonna move this onto the cutting board and start kneading. Lightly flour the cutting board. And let's turn our dough out onto the board and basically start kneading this using the heel of my hand to sort of turn it onto itself and push down. I'm feeling pretty good about this. It's still, you know, a little soft. There's a little bit of elasticity to it, so if you press, you know, it doesn't bounce back all the way back, but it certainly does sort of spring back. Now we need to basically shape this and move it into a bowl to let it rise. Large bowl, little bit of oil. Dough goes in, and just a little bit of oil on top to prevent it from drying out. Gonna cover this with a kitchen towel and set it aside for 2 hours. So while our dough is rising, that gives us just enough time to start marinating our pork. This is our pork, which has been sitting overnight in its brine. So now what we need to do is create the Moho Marinade for this, and then we're going to roast this. Let's start on the marinade. I love using immersion blenders for these types of sauces or marinades. They work really, really well. So into the container that comes with the immersion blender, we'll start with some orange juice and some lime juice and some olive oil, some cilantro, some mint. Mint really smells good. Fantastic. A bunch of garlic, some of the orange peel from the orange that I juiced. I'm supposed to use fresh oregano, but again, I don't have any. Some cumin, a bit of salt, and a bit of fresh pepper. So now I just take my stick blender, carefully to start off with, blend everything together until it's a sauce. Perfect. All right, let's get this on the pork. Into a bowl. Cover this with our mojo sauce. Oh, look how good that looks. Let's set this aside for 2 hours. Our dough has been rising for about 2 hours, and it's basically doubled in size, which is what we're looking for. So let's carry on with this, and I'm gonna move this to a lightly floured work surface. Okay, I'm gonna form this into a rectangle so I can split it evenly, and then just cut this in half. Set aside this half for now. So I'm gonna form this into a rectangle. As long as I want my loaf, I'm gonna go about, 12 inches or so long. This looks good. Now I'm just going to roll it tightly as I can, forming a loaf. Okay, with the seam side down, press it down a bit so that it's gonna be easier to make into sandwiches. And I'm gonna move this onto a parchment-lined baking sheet. Dust this with a bit of cornmeal. On goes my loaf, dust lightly with a bit of flour, I'm just gonna cover with a towel and set aside till it's doubled in size again, hour and a half, 2 hours. While our bread's proofing, let's get our pork roasting. So this sat for about 2 hours in the fridge. I'm gonna save a little bit of this because I wanna baste the pork as it cooks. It's gonna cook for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. I'm gonna baste it a few times with this. A little bit is gonna go on top right now. And let's get this roasting in the oven. So now all we have to do is wait.
Later that same evening.
Look how good this looks. This looks fantastic. It's brown. We've got a lot of good caramelization. Any big cut of meat needs to rest, which is perfect because it can rest while our bread cooks. Our bread is done proofing, basically ready to go in the oven, but there's two things that we need to do. First and foremost, we need to cut a slit down the center. If you have a razor, that works. I don't have one, so I'm just gonna use a sharp knife. And the last thing I need to do is spray them with a little bit of water, which is gonna help the crust get really brown and crunchy. All right, let's put these into the oven about 20 minutes or so. Basically until golden brown. I think it's gonna take about 20 minutes. The pork may look even better from this angle, but let's cut some slices of pork and start getting the ingredients ready for our sandwich. I need to try this. Wow, that's sensational. All right, let's cut some slices. That's good to get started. So our sandwich is basically composed of our pork, some ham, pickles, and cheese. Let's get our bread. Here's our bread. I mean, look how good this looks. We're gonna cut this in half and let's make a sandwich. Okay, we're gonna start with yellow mustard on both sides. All the way from edge to edge. So now on our bottom piece, we're gonna start with the pork that we made, the mojo pork. And then some of our sliced ham, our cheese, and last but not least, our pickles. The top can go on. I don't have a plancha or a panini press or anything like that, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a frying pan, and then I'm gonna basically make a top using a pot, and then this weighted thing of beans. It's gonna press down on the sandwich, and we're gonna get that panini press effect. So let's start this up. Get some butter melting. Sandwich goes in. Makeshift panini press goes on. I'm so excited. Look how incredible this looks. Let's cut it in half. Like, look how good this looks. It looks fantastic. The cheese is melted. Everything has come together. It's nice and flat. I think all we have to do now is give this a try. What more is there to say? It's fantastic. It's an incredible sandwich. Everything just works so well together. I'm gonna have another bite. Nothing more to say. Fantastic. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed going on this adventure to make Cuban sandwiches. If you've made the sandwich before, leave a comment below. If you have other sandwiches you like, leave a comment below as well. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos. But that's it for today. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Look how much pork is left over. I'm gonna have Cubanos for days. It's the best sandwich ever.